Okay, is everyone able to see my screen okay? Everyone can see that
Yep.
presentation? Perfect.
Yep.
I'm going to actually move my screen over there. All right. So, as I was introduced, my name is Sherry Penny. I work for the Iowa Women's Foundation, and I am the Employer Engagement Director. And before I can really go into details about understand a little bit more about the Women's Foundation and how we actually got into this work. My role, and I will go ahead and switch you there. So my role was created as a direct result of the governor's task force. They wanted someone to have some feet on the ground to really help communities and businesses form and sustain childcare partnerships across the state. We knew that this was, we were going to start to see our childcare centers take a really big hit when it came to COVID. So that's kind of where my position came from. I am grant funded through the Iowa Economic Development Authority, which is IEDA. I'm grant funded through them for 3 years to do this work. We're about halfway through our grant cycle. And so we're really hoping to get some sustainable projects going in these communities and then continue to help them even after my grant cycle is over. So the Women's Foundation is one of 140 women's funds from around the globe. Our mission really is to improve the lives of Iowa's women and girls through economic self-sufficiency. How we got into this work is back in, 2016, they started a statewide tour called She Matters. They wanted to travel around and decide what are the economic barriers to women's self-sufficiency. So they started this tour in 2016, identified 45 original communities to start with. As they went through this tour, they identified these barriers. Then COVID happened. And as we all know, COVID happened, the world was literally flipped on its side. And so after that happened, they went back to these original communities and said, okay, now that the world looks very different than it did when we first initially came, what is the single barrier that we should really focus our attention on? And that was childcare. Because without childcare, we're starting to understand that, yes, we know that there's a need for housing and employment and education and transportation. But unless you have childcare, somewhere to put the children, they aren't able to necessarily go, parents aren't able to go and get a job. They don't necessarily need housing because they're not moving to your communities to fill the jobs that you have. They don't need the transportation to get to work. The list goes on and on. So childcare really is kind of that foundation of every community. And once we have a solid foundation, we can continue to tackle the rest of the barriers. So IWF started our work in childcare. We've done this work. I have been in this role for a little over a year now, really focusing on this work. So I always like to share just a little background of not only are we educating people across the state, but we're actually making an impact. So I think it's important that people understand the impact that IWF has had. Even in this last year, we've really just exploded with the communities that are reaching out for help. So you can see that we actually started in those initial original 45 communities. And we're, as of today, we are in 72 communities. We have well over 150 businesses, economic development offices, chamber offices working with us to form some sort of childcare solution in their community. You're able to see the amount of dollars that we have given back through grant making, the number of new childcare spaces or slots that were added to the state in 2020. And then also, one thing I always like to touch on is not only are we coming into communities and educating business leaders and stakeholders on the impact childcare has, but we're really working in advocacy as well. And it's important that we continue to advocate and talk to our legislators so that they understand, the state and federal government really understand the fundamental issues that we're facing here in Iowa. So just know that we are doing a whole other part of advocacy as well. And since our work has exploded so fast, that's an area that we're really starting to kind of hone in on. So here comes the interesting data that is behind the childcare barrier. Here are a few numbers. A lot of our numbers are going to come from our state partners that we partner with. HHS, which was formerly the Department of Health and Human Services. It's now Health and Human Services. So HHS, the Department of Education, we work closely with Iowa Workforce Development and especially Child Care Resource and Referral. So here are some numbers that come directly from Child Care Resource and Referral. Of the barriers, I told you that IWF identified that childcare was really one of the main issues that our parents were having in getting back to work and being economically self-sufficient. So in Iowa, there's roughly 76% of households with children under the age of 6 have both parents or all parents working outside of the home. You can see that in Iowa, and one thing I always like to point out with this data is these are registered spaces. So we know that in Iowa, there are several other providers. There are in-home providers that aren't necessarily registered. You may have a non-regulated center, maybe with a church or something that isn't necessarily in the state numbers. So these are just the numbers that are registered or licensed with the state of Iowa. We also know there are neighbors, siblings watching children. So keep that number in mind. You can see in Iowa, we have a shortfall of roughly 300,000 childcare spaces. Sounds like a lot. It is a lot, but you have to remember that not all of those spaces are due to centers being at full capacity. So one thing I'll touch on a lot through this presentation is, yes, we have a shortfall of 300,000 spaces, but why is that? Is it because we need to build and expand more childcare centers? Is it because our centers have closed down? You can see that 28%, we've lost 28% of our businesses in 5 years and 56% of our childcare businesses in 10 years. So we dug a little bit deeper. We understand, and I'll circle back to that one. So we understand that childcare really is a workforce issue. So with my position being created, one thing that the state really wanted to see happening is a lot of public-private partnerships. They really wanted the business community to get engaged and really start to partner with childcare centers. Because as we understand childcare, we know that it really is a workforce issue for our businesses in the state. Because if they are, especially coming out of COVID, they're struggling to find workers, and a lot of them still are. And that's because we have so many parents that are still staying home with their children after COVID because our childcare centers are full or they've closed down. So we started to really kind of dig into this issue. We realized that, when parents don't have access to childcare, they can't work. Childcare is reported as a top 3 reason for turnover. 85% of parents would leave their jobs for one with more family-friendly benefits. That typically gets my big decision makers when it comes to talking to businesses really starting to listen. Because you have to remember, childcare was never really looked at as a workforce issue in the past. It's not something that it's really talked about. HR leaders are not able to come into an interview with a candidate and talk about home life. Do you have childcare? Do you have everything set up so that you can come to work if we offer you this job? You can't do that. It's just assumed that everything is handled when it comes to the family life. Everything back here is handled. And when you come to work, you're just there to work and get things done. What we're starting to see, especially through COVID now, is that that's not necessarily the case. The businesses that are able to keep and retain their workforce are offering some sort of childcare benefit, are really looking at their employees as a whole instead of just the employee that comes to work. They're understanding there needs to be a little bit of a work-life balance. And I'll touch on some of those examples as I keep going. So again, I always like to talk about how this really is a workforce issue, because we can talk about it, but unless we can show you those numbers and that data, it's just one thing that we're just telling you. So here's the data behind that. You can see childcare challenges cause nearly 2 weeks of absences for parents each year. It's costing Iowa's economy an average of $935 million each year. And the percentage of parents' incomes used to pay for childcare at a registered center each year is 14%. That is double the national rate that's considered affordable, which is 7%. So 14% of parents' income is used to pay for childcare. We know that it's roughly $12,000 to $14,000 for one infant in a registered center. $12,000. I don't know about you, but that's more expensive than college tuition a lot of times. Or you've got your infants, your toddlers. And so you've got all these things that are starting to stack up against childcare. $12,000. I am that statistic. I have twins. Take 12,000 times 2. It was more cost effective for me to step out of the workforce and be at home with my kids. We lost 54,000 women from the workforce after COVID, and we have only seen a very small fraction return to the workforce. So when my business leaders say, how is this a workforce issue? These are the statistics that I show them. 60% is the what it takes for an employee's annual salary that's needed for a business to find their direct replacement. 60%. So when they say, we get it, we understand that childcare is important, but it's costly. I don't know that we can dedicate this much time and money to offer some sort of benefit. I remind them that if you lose this employee, or if you're losing employees because they don't have sustainable childcare, it's going to take you 60% of their salary to find that replacement. And then they start to see that return on the investment, or the ROI. So not only is childcare a business issue and a workforce issue, but it's also a community issue. And I think that's one thing that my work has really evolved over the last year. When I was brought on, it was really to be the business engagement director to really get these businesses on board. And the one thing that, after meeting with several businesses and large decision makers and large industries, they said, we get it. We understand childcare is an issue, but you have to tell us what to do. We're not in the childcare business. We don't necessarily want to be in the childcare business. And the first thing I say to them is, yep, thank you. Please don't. We don't want you in the childcare business because that's not your area of expertise. We already have really great people that are being the experts in childcare, but what we do need is your support and your help. So as we start talking to these businesses, they're saying, we get it, we're willing to help, tell us what to do. So then we kind of dug a little bit deeper and we're trying to figure out, okay, what else can we do? How is this a community issue? So here's a map that shows some of the communities that we're in. In fact, our marketing team loves to tease me and say, we can't keep up. We can't keep updating your map with the number of communities that keep reaching out on a daily basis. Maybe someday it will be interactive, but right now, this just gives you a little bit of an example of the communities that we're in. And on our website, you'll be able to really see those communities spelled out as well. But you can see that we're really exploding all across the state. And we are in, as I mentioned, 72 communities. We're actually in 50 counties, which was really exciting to me because out of Iowa's 99 counties, we are now over half. So my goal is to have a presence at least in all 99 counties before 2026. So we know that it's a community or a workforce issue. Here's how it's a little bit more of a community and workforce issue. We know that when companies provide childcare benefits, their employees' absence decrease by 30%. Job turnover declines by as much as 60%. We know that more than anything, we need access to affordable, quality childcare in all areas of the state. And one thing I really like to touch on there is that quality childcare. So we're seeing some regulations come down the line, and we're really trying to understand more than anything, we need to make sure that our quality is not suffering. So when I come into communities or I talk to business leaders about childcare in their community or offering a childcare benefit, one thing that I always want to say is that we never want to let that quality suffer. And childcare is expensive because they have one revenue stream, and that's what the parents are paying for a weekly or an hourly rate. That's the only income coming into these businesses. And so the only way for them to increase staff wages and keep and retain their staff to be able to open spaces for children is to increase those costs to parents. So we're starting to see the business community saying, okay, and community leaders saying, yep, we see how this is really impacting us economically. So we know that access to non-traditional childcare options for parents are needed, especially with non-traditional schedules. We're seeing a lot of hospitals starting to reach out and needing extended hours for childcare centers. But we also have to figure out how do we first and foremost make sure that we have the staff available to extend those hours. So most of all, we know that we need childcare providers. So as you can see, this is turning into the layers of hurdles, as I like to say, the layers of hurdles that it's taking for us to get out of this crisis that we're in when it comes to childcare. It's a workforce issue. It's a community issue, because in order to attract people to your community, to fill the jobs, to buy the houses, to increase that tax base, you have to have childcare open and available. So like all Iowans, childcare providers need competitive and livable wages. The average starting wage of a childcare worker in Iowa is $10.76. I can tell you that number is a little high when it comes to rural Iowa. Typically, we're seeing anywhere from $9.50 to $10 an hour, and a little low when it comes to our metro areas. We're seeing some of our childcare providers in the metro area anywhere from $12 to $14 an hour. This is the third lowest paid profession behind locker room attendants and lifeguards. One thing I always point out is right now in the state of Iowa, we are paying people more to take care of our hamburgers and our gas than we are for our children. This is why we are in this crisis. We've discovered that it's not just about expanding childcare centers to open up these wait lists. We've discovered after talking to providers that it's an issue of they don't have the staff. If they don't have the staff, they can't take kids off the waiting list. They are really struggling to keep and retain their childcare staff. So it's a staffing issue, because there's so many regulations, rightfully so, that you must have in order to work with children. There are classes you have to take, professional development. All those things are wonderful. We don't want to see any of that change. You want a qualified individual to take care of your children, your most precious gift. However, by doing that, we are now having people going to school for early childhood degrees, having college debt, having class debt, coming out of this field, possibly with student loan debt, to then make $10 an hour. It doesn't add up. So we're seeing a lot of our providers and the field of early childhood education as a dying profession. So we want to get that changed. And you'll start to see some examples of what communities are doing as I keep going. So you can see that 40% of our childcare workers rely on at least one public benefit, and 30% utilize Medicaid. So without those competitive and livable wages, childcare workers are forced to make a change. Over 21% of childcare workers are making $12.50 per hour leave within the first course of the year. And 52% of survey respondents not currently working in the field said they would like to return, but would need better compensation and benefits. I am that statistic. I have worked in childcare all through my adult life, went to school, got my early education degree, but I kept seeing all of these things over and over and saw the impact that it was having on our childcare centers, even on our schools. And so I thought, okay, I need to make a difference. And so that's why I've stepped out of the field, to be able to come and really have a powerful voice for educators, and that includes all educators, early childhood educators, all the way through, to really help everyone understand and form sustainable projects to keep childcare open and available in your communities, because we know that that's the feeder system into your school districts. When people come to your community, they put down roots, they put their children in childcare, those children then funnel into your school districts, and that's important. So here's the fun part. What are people doing about it? Now you understand some of the data behind the crisis that we're in. You understand why we are facing our centers closing down, or facing communities that don't have childcare besides in-home providers or neighbors watching children. So what are some of these community solutions? Well, we know that we have to have livable wages for these childcare workers. So compensation is going to be probably one of the biggest barriers that our childcare providers are facing in keeping their doors open. They just don't want to raise the rates on parents anymore, because as we know, it's double the national rate already to afford childcare. So what other ways can they bring in revenue or bring that cost down to be able to increase their provider wages and keep them working for the centers, keep those rooms open, keep the slots open and available for our workforce? So we know compensation is key. The lack of livable wages for childcare workers in Hamilton County resulted in a change. So Hamilton County has kind of been our poster child of a wonderful childcare solution that is really taking off across the state. And I usually get a lot of questions about this one. So feel free to ask questions as we keep going. And I can touch on it again a little bit at the end, because it's such a complex thing that they're doing. But I also don't want to inundate you with facts and numbers. So what they did in Hamilton County, and why they're the poster child, is because all of these partnerships are so new. We don't have a lot of case studies of communities that have done something long-term to be able to understand the success of them. Hamilton County, for example, has been doing that. They've been doing this program, gosh, I want to say they're going into year 3 or 4 already. They understood that all 4 centers in Hamilton County were low, or were being at or low 65% of their licensed capacity. So they knew that they had a wait list, but they also had they still had room in their centers. So they understood that this was a staffing issue. What can we do? We can get more kids off the wait list, get all of our centers at licensed capacity if we're able to hire that staff. So to address the need for childcare workers, they created a public-private fund for recruitment and retention bonus workers, childcare workers in Hamilton County in their childcare centers. So what that looks like is they actually went and asked community leaders, business leaders, local EDCs, local city councils to invest into a solutions fund. They house it under the Enhance Hamilton County. So it's a 501c3 or 501c6. That's important because it's a not-for-profit, which means any grant money that would come down from the state or federal government would be eligible to also kind of be icing on the cake for these funds. So it's important that they're housed under a fund. What happens then is any of these centers are able to apply to be a part of this program. And in turn, this fund increases their worker wages by $2.85 an hour. So Hamilton County started this. Johnson County has just launched this program in March of this year, and they are seeing great success in this program as well. So what Johnson County did is they started with the business community, and they asked their business community to invest $100 per employee per year. It's not a one-to-one ratio. You're not necessarily purchasing slots. So what happens though is they're building into the contracts that these employers any employer that is investing into this solutions fund gets first right to a wait list. So once they are able to hire and attract staff to open up more slots, these employees then are able to utilize those slots. So that's kind of where they're seeing this return on the investment. And really what these businesses and community leaders are doing is investing in their own community to keep childcare open and available. Interesting story about that is the University of Iowa is obviously an employer, one of the largest employers in Johnson County. They went to them and said, here's what we're asking, $100 per year per employee. And the university said, that's great, but we have like 40,000 employees, so I'm not sure we can really invest that. That's the beauty of these programs. They don't have to invest in for every employee because it's not a one-to-one ratio. It's not purchasing slots. So what the university then has come back and said is, this is what we can invest into this fund. Great. That's just a starting point. It gives the business community and each individual business a chance to invest in this fund, but not necessarily, it's up to whatever they are able to invest in this fund. This also opens it up to community members. You may have retired community members that say, you know what, I would like to invest $100 per year to keep my childcare open and available in our community. We're seeing even in rural Iowa, local Main Street flower shops. Maybe they have one employee, but they're saying, we'll pay $100 a year to invest in childcare, or maybe it's $50, but every little bit helps. Our county supervisors are starting to say, okay, we can invest maybe some of our local option sales tax, or we can invest. I will say that Johnson County did use ARPA funds. We know those are pretty much gone and dried up, but they did use some of their ARPA funds to invest in this program to start with. But I'm seeing county supervisors and city councils saying, all right, here's what we can invest in this. We do have those contracts. We have contracts, sample contracts that we can provide to you to kind of help get these programs going if it's something that you're interested in. But every community looks very different. Right now, there are 10 more additional communities that are starting some sort of wage enhancement program. So you can see in Hamilton County, since they are the ones that have done this the longest, we're able to see some of these statistics coming out of it. You can see how much was raised, over $700,000. They have provided over $138,000 in bonuses. And you can see on average what the recruitment bonus is. So Hamilton County did it for longevity. If Child Care Center staff was there, they were able to receive these recruitment or retention bonuses, but they also had recruitment bonuses to try and increase the staff that were applying for these jobs. Johnson County took it and decided they would rather invest this money because they have several centers in Johnson County and in-home providers. So they apply to be a part of this program. You have to provide all your data as the center saying how much it's going to take in order for you to increase your wages by $2 an hour is what Johnson County had set out. Whereas Hamilton County kept it a recruitment and retention bonus. So quarterly, they're providing bonuses out of these funds. I can tell you that it's been so successful in Hamilton County, and they now have a lot of, I would say almost all their business community buying into this. And in fact, we're getting case studies from businesses that have invested in Hamilton County to be able to talk about how this has increased their workforce, what it has done, the impact it's had for their employees to have childcare open and available. So soon we'll have those case statements from Hamilton County to add into this presentation. But I think what's important is that because they've been so successful and now they have their businesses and community leaders signing up for 2-3 year contracts of their investment, they actually want to start taking that and pay down some insurance premiums for childcare workers. So not only are they going to have these recruitment and retention bonuses, but now they're going to hopefully be able to offset the cost of some insurance benefits for the workers as well. So by investing in your own community with these, by keeping the money local, by keeping the control local, by having it housed under a not-for-profit, it's a tax incentive for people to invest in or to donate into as well. All sorts of these wonderful things are kind of coming together. I will say a lot of our community leaders and your county leaders are happy to keep that money and that control local, because then you can use that money for any sort of childcare solution fund. And that's really what some communities are starting to call it. Rather than tying it into wage enhancements, they're calling it a child care solutions fund. And then they can use it for whatever they see fit. So before any community would even think about starting this, I would highly encourage you to survey your providers, your parents, your community members. We do have those surveys available that you can provide out to your community to really understand that need. Because again, every community is different. So without understanding the need in your community, we won't know what it is going to be needed. You're going to need to know how much money is it going to have in a pot, in the pot for 1 year of salaries. What does it look like? What is the ask to the business community? All sorts of those things. And that's something that my position can really help you with. I can come into the community, provide those surveys for you, kind of help you form that plan. I can't do it for you because I'm only one person and you know your communities best, but I'm there to offer suggestions, resources, and really make sure that you're kind of on the right path when it comes to getting community leaders on board and having people really help you get these things started. So that's a lot about the wage enhancement program. But as of April 30th, 2022, 65 additional children were able to enroll in the Hamilton County Child Care Centers. I can tell you all 4 centers are now at max licensed capacity because they've been able to hire and retain all of the staff for child care centers. So here are more examples. And this is kind of where some of the fun, interesting things that we're starting to see. So I talked about Hamilton County, but here we're starting to see, I have a lot of communities that are interested in these wage enhancement programs or a child care solution fund of some sort, but they're also tying in different examples from other communities as well. So it's not just one solution. It's going to take kind of an all hands on deck type of attitude for this. So what you can see is here's some of these exciting examples that we're starting to see. It doesn't have to be something as large and cumbersome of an undertaking of a child care solutions fund or wage enhancement. It can be something so simple. So one thing we're seeing is flexible schedules. So this is a factory in Western Iowa. I never give the community or the company, and you'll understand why at the end of this story. But we actually, when I first started, we went and presented our business presentation to a decision maker in this factory and said, here's all the data, just so you know, are you interested in offering some sort of childcare benefit? We can help you. And this decision maker said, thanks, we get it, but I don't see that. I just don't think that that's an issue for us. I don't think that childcare is really a benefit we're looking to explore at this time. Okay, sounds great. Completely understand. Not even 2 weeks later, we received a call from that same decision maker, and he said, yeah, it turns out we do have an issue when it comes to childcare. We just didn't know it. And I said, oh goodness, well, what happened? Well, the cops came to the factory because there were children in the cars in the parking lot unsupervised. Turns out you had 2-parent households. One parent worked first shift, second parent worked second shift. There was a 30-minute gap between when the parents both one needed to clock into work and the other before they could clock out. So that 30-minute window, rather than having someone come into the home, because that's expensive and it's only 30 minutes, these parents were bringing their children, leaving them in the cars, so that then when the next parent got off work, they would then take the children home. Some community member drove by, saw children playing in the cars, rightfully so, called the cops. And then the cops came and talked to this decision maker. And he said, I had no idea. And I said, that's cool. We understand that because that's not something that's usually talked about. Parents aren't going to come, your employees aren't going to come to you and say, I'm really struggling with childcare right now. I really need some sort of help, or I'm going to have to leave my job, because then they're worried they're going to be replaced, Why would you want to hire someone that has all these additional home life things going on? So they just solve it themselves. All it took was adjusting the parent's schedule by 30 minutes so that they could do a warm handoff. It didn't cost the company any additional money. It's not a benefit all their employees are going to use, but for parents at that age, it works. And this decision maker was just like, I had no idea. So it can be as simple as tweaking your schedules. We're starting to see some companies saying they are allowing people to stay working from home, which is a really huge benefit to people. If they're able to work from home, maybe during the school year, if they have school age kids, they can work from home so that they can get their work done quickly, efficiently. We're just starting to see the sky is the limit when it comes to flexible schedules. So some additional examples. We do have stipends that are being paid directly to childcare providers. So we have a factory in Sioux City that has said they are going to pay, they actually gave $60,000 to help the childcare center renovate and add on a little bit of an expansion. This center happened to be at maxed license capacity, so they needed to expand. So they've expanded, they helped pay to expand the center. In return, they were given 10 childcare spaces. When when one of their employees is utilizing that slot, the employer is paying 50%. So let's say the slot is $200. The employer is paying $100 and the employee is paying $100 to this childcare center. So that's their stipend. Then if an employee is not, they don't have anyone utilizing that slot that the business owns, the business is paying 100% of that slot so that we can make sure that we still are able to keep that childcare worker employed. So they're paying the full $200 until they have another employee ready to utilize that space. So that's one example. Flexible spending accounts, we're starting to see that that's one thing our legislation is working on, using FSAs and HSAs to actually be able to utilize that money for childcare expenses. That is something that would be a pretty easy change for our federal government to allow HSA money to be used for childcare expenses, reimbursements, and also really increasing that. It's been very low for quite a few years. They did increase that during COVID, but then it went back down. So we're hoping that's a legislative change that we can really advocate for. And a lot of our business community is saying that's something they would really like to see happen. So we have people working with legislators to get that pushed through as well. So then you also have backup childcare options. There's a company in Waterloo that is partnering with a local childcare center that happens to be kind of in their backyard. This is a hospital, and they have purchased, I want to say it's 5 childcare spaces to be able to be utilized as drop-in care. So this company is paying the weekly rate so that this spot is still held open and available. The center is still able to keep that staff hired because they need that operating cost coming in. And then what happens is anytime any of their employees would run into an issue, maybe they have their kids in an in-home, that in-home provider is sick or on vacation, or a grandparent is watching them and the grandparent is gone, they're able to utilize this drop-in care as well. We are not starting to see, but we are still seeing a lot of on-site childcare centers being built by companies across the state. We have really great examples of that in Pella and Norway, Iowa. So you've got Frontier and Vermeer are 2 companies that do provide on-site childcare. And again, because every community, every business is so different, that's, a unique situation. But before anyone goes into any sort of childcare project, again, we always tell them we need to find that need by surveying. Then we're going to figure out how we're going to meet that need. And then we're going to figure out how are we going to sustain it. So then you'll see we do have wage enhancement and wage supplement programs. I mentioned the Hamilton County and Johnson County example. And then one unique thing we're starting to see is some intergenerational care. So the example is Perry, Iowa, Perry Lutheran Homes. They have 3 campuses in Perry. And what they have done is in the basement of their assisted living facility, they have created a childcare center. The great thing about this is that intergenerational care has provided the longevity and increased the quality of life for their elders, but also for their children. And also now you have these assisted living people that are retired, looking for things to do. They come down and they actually volunteer their time. All it takes in Iowa is a background check to make sure that they are certified, they can come in and be around children. But they come in and they volunteer their time to rock babies, provide breaks for the staff. So now these centers don't have to hire additional staff members to provide breaks and all sorts of things for some of their workers. So that's one way we're starting to see it. And it's been so wonderful. They're actually opening up a second location. They're looking to expand into their second campus. And a lot of people, when I go into communities, will say, that's great, but we don't really have that capability in our assisted living facility or in our nursing home. And I say to them, that's okay. It doesn't have to be housed there, but maybe you want to incorporate some sort of intergenerational care with a child care center that you have or that you're going to be building. And let's start to tap into that resource of a foster grandparent program. A lot of our schools utilize retired people to come in as foster grandparents. So let's utilize that. So you can see that all these benefits, it can be a little bit of everything coming together to create your community's unique partnership in childcare. Then we've got school districts. Our school districts are really starting to step up. Now, school districts, I can say, are a little bit unique. I'm seeing most of our school district partnerships in very rural communities, communities that do not have childcare already available as far as a childcare center, or they're a very small district. Maybe they have space in their building. Maybe maybe all the in-home centers have closed down. So for example, in Andrew and Preston, Iowa, and also in Riceville, Iowa, what the school district has done is they have taken on childcare in the school district by using enterprise funds. So if you're not familiar with school district budgets, you have several buckets of money that you can use. You cannot use general fund money because that's taxpayer money for childcare, but you can use enterprise funds. And enterprise funds from a district come from anytime you go to your child's basketball game and they charge you a fee to come in and watch, that's where those enterprise funds come from. It's when a school district provides goods or services for additional cost to the general public. So what they're doing is employing, maybe they're even starting in Riceville, they're starting by employing only the director. So they said, we will employ the director as a school district employee using enterprise funds. What happens then is now this director is eligible for the same benefits that their teachers are, IPERS, vacation, those kinds of benefits. The childcare has to be self-sustaining. So that's going to take a large bulk of the director's salary is now funneled through enterprise funds. And then they're able to use the operating funds that parents are paying for their weekly or hourly rates to pay their staff quality wages, because you've taken a large chunk of that off of the director's salary being taken off that. So we're starting to see those kinds of partnerships. It's been so successful in Riceville that now they've actually brought it on to employ full-time staff members. Their goal is to get all the way down to part-time staff, all employed by enterprise funds. Because the money then, any additional revenue that comes in to this program goes back into the school's enterprise funds. So now they're really bulking up those enterprise funds and keeping themselves self-sustaining. So with those, there's lots of different caveats, and I'm happy to go into that because it does get a little bit, there's a lot of layers to a school district owning and operating a childcare center. And so one thing I always like to do, any community that's interested in that, I definitely put you in touch with the two superintendents that have been doing these programs, because they're the experts. They really understand the Department of Education regulations, how they can do this, how it's been beneficial. Some districts are saying, sounds great. we do not want to take on childcare. We do not want to operate a childcare center. But what we can do is we'll provide the meals. We can take those food numbers and we can provide all of the meals. So now the center doesn't have to employ a cook. They just need, or they might not, if you're building a center, you wouldn't even have to have the full grade commercial kitchen. Now you just need warming centers. So then what happens is the school district benefits because they're able to utilize those numbers in their free and reduced lunch counts, and they get reimbursed from the state. So it's a huge burden off of these childcare centers by partnering with the district to have them provide some of the meals. So that's another way that our districts are starting to kind of work together when it comes to childcare. And then one of the last ones is our business coalitions. We're seeing a lot of businesses come together to form sustainable programs. So maybe that's where we're seeing some of in some rural communities, the childcare solutions funds get going. In St. Ansgar, Iowa, it's a very small community of about 1,700 people. Their business community, in that community, their unique situation was that they were at max license capacity and they needed to expand. So they pooled all their business leaders, brought them together and said, great, we need to pay for this expansion and we need to hire more staff if we have more rooms coming available. So the businesses got together, housed this money under the economic development department in St. Ansgar. And then what they did is they're actually paying for the majority of these renovations. And they applied for the state grant that came out last summer for the childcare infrastructure grant. So there's all sorts of unique ideas. The list goes on and on. But until I know the exact needs of your specific community, it's just an example of what's happening all across the state. So it's a lot of information and a lot of details coming at you. But one thing I hear is, that's great, but all of that sounds like a lot. What are some small things that we can do? Well, here, we just like to show you that by just coming together, all Iowans can help. Here are some of the statistics on why we should continue. Again, it's one way to just really hone in what we're losing from an economic standpoint to the state of Iowa. But really, we're calling on all of our businesses, churches, schools, nonprofits, just to really continue to support your local childcare providers and to have these conversations. And that's what's unique about the Women's Foundation. We're able to come in and help you. I can give this presentation to your decision makers, to your community stakeholders, and then we can talk about, here's what's happening in your backyard. Here are some things that maybe you could do, and have people really ask those nitty-gritty questions. Because sometimes when it comes from people in the community, it gets lost in translation or it falls on deaf ears. But when you have an expert from outside the community saying, here's the data all across Iowa, this is what we're seeing, they tend to start to take notice. So please utilize the Women's Foundation as that resource. So this is one thing that we're doing is we share the resources. We pool the community resources. We make it easier to kind of help you come up with a plan, form that plan, and then we can provide survey examples, contract examples. I actually work with businesses each individually because I can tell you most business leaders having a community presentation like this is wonderful. It gives them the message, but then there's that follow-up. It's really holding each business's hand to say, okay, here's what the goal of this wage enhancement, let's just say, program is, but here's what can you do? Let's talk to your employees. Let's find out what your need is so you understand what you want to invest. So I will really take that burden off of you by really talking to those business leaders. And also because it's coming from that outside voice, it tends to go farther. But other ways you can contribute, very simply, volunteering, offering services, supplying crucial items and materials, donating space, facilitate connections, really talking about it, educating your community, educating your neighbors, and just continuing to talk about how much childcare is really suffering and how much it really impacts your community. My favorite story about donating space is we were in a community and hosted a community meeting, which is this presentation to a large group of people in one specific community. Right before the meeting started, there was this wonderful, sweet, kind old gentleman that kind of shuffled in wearing his farmer hat and overalls. And I asked the host, and I said, who is that gentleman? And she says, oh, that's John Smith. He comes to everything. He's probably just here for the free donuts and coffee, And I'm like, great. Anyone that wants to hear and understand what's happening in childcare or what's happening in their community in general, we welcome. So this gentleman sat quietly in the back through the whole meeting. Turns out this community had everything in place, but they really just couldn't get the land. They needed to build a childcare center. They didn't have childcare. Everything had been closed down. They needed to find a place to build a center. They were fundraising. Everything else was handled, but land is really expensive. This John Smith stood up and said, well, if it's land you needed, this is a pretty important thing. We've got to have a place for our kids if we want to keep people coming to our county and to our community. If it's land you need, I got 2 acres on my property way over there on this field, and I'll just donate that to you for $1. You never know who's in the room. By having conversations, you never know who's going to spark that little interest of, oh, well, I didn't know that was such a need. I could do that. I can help out. Not every community has a John Smith, but you may have someone that says, you know what, I'm an expert grant writer. I do that in my spare time. I'm willing to donate my time to be a grant writer, and I'll start exploring some grant opportunities that we could tap into for the community to get childcare going. So that's where these community presentations are so important. You never know who's in the room. And then finally, I am done talking at you. So this is the part where you get to really ask me questions. And sometimes it's hard to answer really specific community questions, but I'm happy to answer kind of anything I'm able. And if I don't have an answer for you, I'm happy to find it or connect you with the expert in that field. Maybe it's an expert in another community that is doing this, but I'm happy to connect you with them as well. So I will stop sharing so I can see all of you. And do you have any questions for me? And it's okay if you don't too. Sometimes in these people, the questions are really specific. So please don't hesitate to reach out by email. I'm happy to meet with people individually and hear exactly what's happening in your community, because that's when it's easier to say, have you thought about this? Or have you tried this? And this is where I would get started. And then kind of give you the tools and resources to get started and get more people on board with you. And then we can circle back and have maybe a community meeting and talk about all of these issues.
I do have one thank you. Thank you for the information.
Yes.
Great presentation.
In
the chat.
wonderful.
No questions yet, though.
No
So if
problem.
anybody has any questions, just unmute yourself and we can have a conversation.
And feel free also to share this presentation too. If I haven't already sent it to you, I will send you the PDF.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I was actually going to ask you for that.
Yep, I'll send the
I'll
PDF
send that
of
out
this
with the recording to all of those who registered.
Perfect, because that's really important. And that's one of the first resources that I usually have people do. I'll send you the partnership document that we have. It's kind of a 2 pages that really kind of highlights just a paragraph form of the examples that I gave. Also, I have a 1-pager that details my position, what I can do, and how I can help your community. And then I'll also send this presentation, because you're going to have to get more people in your communities. It can't just, we always need a community champion. That's where we see the success happen, but it can't be done by one person alone. You need an army of people to help you. And so by sharing some of these resources, you can say, hey, I saw this presentation. I really think it'd be great to have this person, the Women's Foundation, come in and talk to us and help us understand what's happening in our backyard.
Question. We have a question from Marla, who's with ECIA. She asked if they can replay this at a community meeting, if any of us here in ECIA can do that.